Hey, Noah Tichy here for Gearspace. This video is all about the Auratone 5C Active Supersound Cube 4.5-inch reference monitors. Over the course of our time together today, I'm going to offer you a walkthrough of the technical features of these 6-inch cubed single driver studio monitors, but that's not all. With these monitors, perhaps more than any others, there is a rich history that informs how we understand their place in the studio, so I'd be remiss if I neglected to include that. Let's start at the beginning. In 1958, a man named Jack Wilson began building speakers by hand in his garage in Chula Vista, California. He called his speakers Oratones, and the Auratone Corporation was formed by Jack, his wife Harriet Elaine, and his son Paul in the 1970s, as Auratone speakers continued to gain popularity in studios across the country. The original 5C was issued in 1975, and it wasn't long before you could find 5Cs in 60 to 70% of studios worldwide. Quincy Jones used an early iteration of Auratone 5Cs in producing Michael Jackson's Thriller, the best-selling album of all time. If that's not enough of an endorsement, Jones dubbed the 5C the Truth Speaker. Their near omnipresence in studio spaces makes it surprisingly easy to find well-known producers, engineers, and artists photographed with 5Cs. So what is it about the Auratone 5C that makes it the Truth Speaker? That's the interesting part. In the decades that people have been mixing with 5Cs, they've developed a reputation for making mixes that sound reasonably good on other monitors sound significantly less good. Producers have called them Horrotone and Awfultone, but it's not actually a bad speaker. In fact, the doped paper cone driver and closed box cabinet deliver relatively low distortion and fast transient response. And not all mixes sound bad through the 5Cs. Some come through quite nicely. Essentially, the Auratone 5C's legacy is in raising the bar for a mix. What sounds good on other studio monitors will not necessarily sound good on the Auratone 5C, but if you can make your mix sound good on the Auratone 5C, then there's a good chance that it'll sound better on a wider swath of listening setups for your audience. So what gives the Auratone 5C its characteristic sound? Put most simply, it is an extremely mid-range forward monitor, meaning that the low end and the high end of the frequency spectrum are both significantly less present relative to the mid-range. It's like putting a magnifying glass on the ugly parts of a mix that can sometimes hide behind the wider frequency response of a studio setup, but not in a lot of consumer audio setups. The published frequency response for the new Active Supersound Cube is 80 Hz to 15,000 Hz, but this frequency response is not even from top to bottom. There is a gradual drop from about 8K to 10K, and a much sharper drop after 12K. At the low end of the spectrum, the drop starts gradually at around 200 Hz, then more precipitously below 100 Hz. That frequency response is arguably most of what you are paying for when you pick up an Auratone 5C. It's the same frequency response through which Dr. Dre is perceiving his mixes about 80% of the time he is mixing, and likely the same goes for Mixed by Ali, who learned this particular technique of mixing mostly in mono from Dr. Dre. It's the same frequency response that sent people chasing after used vintage 5Cs when they were out of production, and that Avant Electronics attempted to reproduce with the Mixcube, and Behringer with the C5A and the C50A. As with all discontinued, vintage, highly sought-after gear, it's not all that easy to come by old, well-maintained 5Cs, so it made quite a splash when Auratone, with new president Alexander Jacobson, Jack Wilson's grandson, announced they would be manufacturing them once again. Thus far, we've mostly discussed history, which I think is fitting because part of what you get with an Auratone 5C is the history on which it's built. However, this is in a lot of ways a totally new product. A lot of the components that were used with earlier iterations of the Auratone 5C are no longer in production, so they've been swapped out with new components. But I think probably the most notable new addition is the feature that makes the Auratone 5C active Super Sound Cube active. Auratone collaborated with Bettermaker to integrate a 50 watt into 8 ohm amplifier into the classic 5C body for an all-in-one setup right out of the box with an XLR 1/4 inch combo input. The classic 5C body changes ever so slightly from iteration to iteration, which is part of the charm. But the current iteration is 6.5 inches in height and width and 6 inches in depth, so not quite a cube, but very close. The sides are made of 16mm MDF, and it feels pretty substantial. It's a lot heavier than it looks. It comes with foam attached to the bottom, which is nice because it means you don't have to source or repurpose foam on your own, unless of course you have plans for setting up a particular listening position. There is overcurrent, overheating, and short protection, which is nice. And the controls are a simple on-off switch with an LED light to indicate when the monitor is on. Oh, and if you don't like a matte black finish, these come in wood grain also. I think that about covers the Auratone 5C Active Super Sound Cube 4.5-inch reference monitor. This is a remake of a classic, one of the most, if not the most, trusted mixdown monitors ever made, but with the added convenience of an integrated amplifier produced by an equally trusted name in studio hardware, Bettermaker. There's a reason there are so many clones of this monitor on the market. It fulfills a specific and serious need in the daily work of anybody preparing audio for mass listening. The need to test your mix through a mid-forward frequency response for purposes of catching flaws was not discontinued, even when the 5Cs were. So this reissue should have producers the world over breathing a sigh of relief. Anyway, I hope this video has been helpful. If it was, be sure to give it a like and subscribe to the Gearspace Forum YouTube channel and hit the notification bell so that you know next time we put something out. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time.